Hello, everyone. Today, I'm about to show you a coin that could completely change your life. And no, I'm not joking. This is not a scam. Most people think this coin is just an ordinary piece of change, something you wouldn't even look at twice. But here's the truth. This coin is becoming extremely rare. In the near future, its value could skyrocket by thousands of dollars. And the shocking part is, you might already have it in your pocket right now. But once it disappears from circulation, you will never find it again. So if you have this coin, do not spend it. Keep it safe. Because this small coin could turn into a huge fortune. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that represents not only a small piece of American currency, but also a window into the history of the United States. During one of its most turbulent decades, the Jefferson nickel minted in 1968 is more than just a 5-cent piece. It is a reflection of American culture, politics, economics, and artistry from the time of its creation to the modern era. And when we talk about the 1968 Jefferson nickel, we step into a fascinating story that ties together the legacy of Thomas Jefferson, the craftsmanship of Felix Schlag, who designed the coin in the late 1930s, and the broader events of the late 1960s that shaped America in ways that are still felt today. The year 1968 was a year of transformation and turmoil in the United States. The country was dealing with the aftermath of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. The Vietnam War was raging. Protests were erupting across college campuses, and American society was grappling with questions of civil rights, democracy, and its place in the world. In this charged atmosphere, the Mint continued its responsibility of producing coinage for everyday commerce, and among the most familiar pieces struck during that year was the Jefferson nickel, first introduced in 1938 as a replacement for the Buffalo nickel. The Jefferson nickel was designed by German-born sculptor Felix Schlag, who won a national competition to design the coin in 1938. The obverse features a left-facing portrait of Thomas Jefferson, the third President of the United States, author of the Declaration of Independence, and a central figure in American democracy. The reverse features his famous Virginia estate Monticello, which Jefferson himself designed, and which stands as a symbol of his intellect and his contradictions, as both an advocate for liberty and a man who owned enslaved people by 1968. Schlag's design had been circulating for 3 decades, and the coin had become a trusted staple in American pockets, purses, and cash registers. Now, what makes the 1968 Jefferson nickel particularly interesting is not just the design itself, but the context of minting in that specific year. Prior to 1968, all proof coins had been struck. In Philadelphia, however, beginning in 1968, proof production was moved permanently to the San Francisco Mint. This marked a turning point in the history of American coinage. The 1968 proof Jefferson nickels struck at San Francisco with the S Mint mark became the very first modern proof coins to carry that designation. Collectors instantly recognized these pieces as significant because they marked the revival of proof coinage after a 3-year hiatus between 1965 and 1967. During that suspension, proof and uncirculated mint sets were replaced with so-called special mint sets, which did not achieve the same level of mirror-like finish and sharp detail that collectors loved. The return of proof coins in 1968, with the Jefferson nickel leading the way, restored a sense of artistry and tradition to American numismatics. The circulation strikes of the 1968 nickel also have a story of their own. The coins were minted at 3 facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Unlike Philadelphia nickels of earlier years, which carried no mint mark, the 1968 issues introduced a permanent change. All mint marks now appeared on the obverse of the coin, just below Jefferson's portrait on the right side near the rim. This was a significant modification, because for decades the placement of mint marks had been a subject of debate, and in 1965 the Mint had even removed mint marks entirely to discourage coin hoarding during a nationwide shortage. When the mint marks returned in 1968, their new position on the obverse signaled both a design shift and a renewed sense of transparency for collectors and the general public. In terms of mintage, the 1968 nickels struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco circulated widely and were used in everyday commerce across the country. These were not rare in general circulation, but certain varieties and conditions became valuable over time. For example, proof strikes from San Francisco that were particularly well preserved or featured deep cameo contrasts between frosted devices and mirrored fields grew in demand among collectors. Similarly, circulation strikes with full steps on the Monticello reverse, a grading designation that refers to sharp and complete detail in the depiction of the steps, became especially sought after since most coins did not strike with that level of clarity due to the mint's high-speed production. Understanding the historical role of the 1968 nickel also requires a look at how coinage fit into the broader economic situation of the late 1960s. Inflation was beginning to take hold, and the United States was still adjusting to the removal of silver from its coinage earlier in the decade, while nickels never contained silver except for the wartime alloy years. Between 1942 and 1945, when nickel was needed for the war effort, the public had grown accustomed to seeing design and compositional changes across coin denominations. The Jefferson nickel stood as one of the few coins whose design and metallic composition remained unchanged during this time. Its stability provided a kind of continuity amidst economic uncertainty. Collectors often point out that the 1968 Jefferson nickel is a coin of transitions. It represents the transition from Philadelphia to San Francisco, for proof strikes the transition of mint mark placement to the obverse, the transition back to proof production after the special mint set years, and the broader transition of America itself through a decade of upheaval and change. While a single 5-cent piece may seem insignificant, it reflects the story of a nation striving to balance tradition with change and stability with innovation. To truly appreciate the 1968 Jefferson nickel, you have to think about the layers of meaning it carries at the surface. It is simply a common coin struck in the millions and used in daily transactions at gas stations, diners, and grocery stores. But for numismatists, it is an artifact of design, history, monetary policy, and cultural symbolism. The details of its production, the choices made by the mint, and the reception by collectors all combine to give this coin a depth that extends far beyond its face value. By the time you finish studying the history of the 1968 Jefferson nickel, you realize that no coin exists in isolation. Every detail, from the placement of a mint mark to the shine of a proof finish, tells a story about the people who made it, the time in which it was struck, and the values that shaped the nation. And that is why, when you hold a 1968 nickel in your hand, you are not just holding a piece of metal, you are holding a chapter in American history. Imagine holding in your hand a coin that on the surface seems ordinary. A 5-cent piece minted in 1984, yet behind its modest copper-nickel shell lies a fascinating chapter of American history, economics, artistry, and numismatics that makes the 1984 Jefferson nickel far more than just spare change. This coin is not only a reflection of the mint's production standards of the early 1980s, but also a window into the changing political, economic, and cultural climate of the United States. During that decade, to fully understand the significance of the 1984 Jefferson nickel, we must begin with the origins of the Jefferson nickel itself, a design that dates back to 1938, when it replaced the Buffalo nickel after a national competition, called upon sculptors and artists to create a new design that honored one of the nation's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. The winning design by Felix Schlag featured Jefferson on the obverse facing left with his profile strongly rendered, and on the reverse the stately image of Monticello Jefferson's Virginia estate. This design remained remarkably consistent for decades, and by 1984 it was still in use with only minor modifications. Over the years, the Jefferson nickel was one of the longest-running coin designs in American history, and the 1984 issue was an important part of that continuing legacy. In the early 1980s, the United States Mint was under significant pressure as demand for coinage was high and the economy required billions of coins in circulation. 1984 was a year when coin production ramped up dramatically, and the Jefferson nickel struck in both Philadelphia and Denver played a crucial role in meeting that demand. The Philadelphia Mint issued coins without a mint mark. While the Denver Mint coins carried the familiar D-Mint mark, collectors also recognized the importance of the San Francisco Mint, which in 1984 struck proof coins with the S-Mint mark. These proof nickels were made with extra, care-polished dies and mirror-like surfaces to satisfy the growing collector market, the 1984 Jefferson nickel. Like all nickels of its era, was composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel, a metallic blend chosen for durability and longevity. This alloy gave the coin its silvery appearance and its resilience in circulation, allowing it to endure decades of use without excessive wear. The weight of the coin was 5 grams with a diameter of 21.2 millimeters and a thickness of 1.95 millimeters. Technical specifications may sound dry, but they are vital to understanding how standardized production at the Mint ensured consistency and reliability in the nation's currency. The year 1984 was significant not just for the coinage itself, but for the broader context of the nation. President Ronald Reagan was midway through his second term. The Cold War was still in full effect. The American economy was showing strong growth after a recession earlier in the decade, and consumer confidence was rebounding in this environment. The Jefferson nickel continued to play its role as a workhorse coin, essential for daily commerce, vending machines, parking meters, and countless small transactions. Nickels may have been low in denomination, but their ubiquity made them indispensable. Examining the 1984 Jefferson nickel closely reveals the artistry and symbolism embedded in its design. On the obverse, Jefferson's portrait remained dominant, his stern expression and classical profile reflecting the seriousness of a statesman who authored the Declaration of Independence and later served as the nation's third president. Schlag's design, though originally criticized for its flatness and lack of detail, had by 1984 become iconic and deeply familiar to generations of Americans. On the reverse, Monticello stood as a neoclassical monument, not only to Jefferson's personal vision of architecture, but to the ideals of democracy, knowledge, and progress that he cherished for collectors. The 1984 Jefferson nickel presents several areas of interest, though hundreds of millions were struck, making most examples common in circulated condition. Certain varieties and errors can command strong premiums. Some 1984 nickels exhibit die cracks, die clashes, or repunched mint marks, and these minting anomalies offer specialists fascinating opportunities for study and collection. Proof coins from San Francisco, particularly those with deep cameo contrast, are highly prized in numismatic circles as they showcase the design with striking clarity and brilliance. The Jefferson nickel series as a whole has always been a favorite among collectors because it bridges accessibility with depth. On one hand, millions of examples can be found in circulation. On the other, rare errors and high-grade certified specimens offer challenges to even the most advanced numismatists. The 1984 issue fits perfectly within this continuum as both a common, everyday coin and a collectible piece of history, as we look deeper into the cultural and economic role of the nickel. In 1984, we see how even such a small denomination coin helped define the daily experience of Americans during that decade. Prices of goods in the mid-1980s made the nickel relevant in countless purchases, from candy bars to newspapers. Vending machine items, often priced at multiples of 5 cents, reinforced the necessity of the nickel in pocket change. While inflation had eroded some of the purchasing power of the coin, its presence remained vital and its symbolism enduring. Jefferson, as a figure, embodied the Enlightenment ideals of reason and progress, ideals that still resonated with a nation that in 1984 was positioning itself as a global leader in technology, finance, and culture. When we analyze the minting process itself, we gain further appreciation for the 1984 Jefferson nickel advances in die technology, press machinery, and quality control meant that coins were produced at a higher speed and with greater precision than in earlier decades. The mint had to balance efficiency with artistry, making sure that each coin, though mass-produced, retained the dignity of a national symbol in Philadelphia and Denver. Vast minting facilities operated around the clock, striking millions upon millions of nickels and shipping them nationwide to banks, businesses, and federal institutions. The logistics of coin distribution in 1984 were a massive undertaking, with armored trucks, rail shipments, and regional banks ensuring that nickels reached every corner of the country. The proof coins of 1984, made in San Francisco, represented another dimension of the mint's mission. While circulation strikes emphasized volume, proof coins emphasized perfection. Each planche was carefully polished and struck multiple times to create sharp reliefs and mirror-like fields. Collectors who acquired 1984 proof sets treasured these nickels as examples of minting artistry, and today they remain valuable time capsules of mid-1980s coinage culture. Examining the market for 1984 Jefferson nickels, we find that circulated examples remain common and generally worth face value, but uncirculated coins, particularly those graded by professional services such as PCGS or NGC, can achieve higher values, depending on condition. Full-step designations, where the steps of Monticello on the reverse are fully struck and visible, are especially sought after since weak strikes often obscured these details. The presence of full steps dramatically increases the desirability and value of a 1984 nickel. Errors, too, play a significant role in the collector market. Off-center strikes, clipped planches, and double-die errors all represent fascinating variations that transform ordinary nickels into rare and valuable pieces for numismatists who study die states, minting practices, and distribution patterns. The 1984 Jefferson nickel continues to provide fertile ground for research. When we step back and consider the historical arc of the Jefferson nickel, we realize that the 1984 issue was part of a long continuum stretching from the pre-war years of 1938 through the wartime silver alloy nickels of 1942 to 1945, through post-war stability and into the modern era. Each year's production reflects not only the mint's practical needs, but also the broader social and economic context of the nation. By 1984, the design was nearly 50 years old, a remarkable longevity for any coin design, and while critics occasionally called for modernization, the Jefferson nickel endured because of its familiarity, its historical resonance, and its widespread acceptance in commerce. Thus, the 1984 Jefferson nickel stands today as both a product of its time and a timeless link to America's numismatic heritage, a small coin that embodies the legacy of Jefferson, the artistry of Schlag, the technical achievements of the United States Mint, and the daily lives of millions of Americans who carried it in their pockets, used it in transactions, and perhaps set aside a few for their growing coin collections. Imagine holding in your hand a piece of American history that not only represents 5 cents in value, but also carries the weight of a nation's struggles, triumphs, and transformations. The Jefferson nickel of 1940 is far more than a small coin. Struck in nickel and copper, it is a symbol of an era, a reflection of the United States as it stood on the brink of global conflict, and a continuation of a design that had already begun to carve its place in numismatic history. The story of the 1940 Jefferson nickel begins with its origins just a year after the first issue in 1938, when the United States Mint replaced the long-running Buffalo nickel with a new design honoring the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. The Buffalo nickel had been admired for its artistry, yet it posed challenges in terms of production and durability. Its intricate details often wore down quickly, and the Mint sought a design that would not only be more practical, but also more enduring. The winning design for the Jefferson nickel came from Felix Schlag, a German-born American sculptor whose entry triumphed in the 1938 design competition. Schlage's obverse portrait of Jefferson was a bold, left-facing bust, drawing attention to the intellectual strength of the statesman, while the reverse featured a depiction of Monticello Jefferson's beloved Virginia home, though Schlage's original design underwent modifications imposed by the Commission of Fine Arts and the Mint. The final result was a coin that blended functionality with dignity. The Jefferson nickel would remain in production with various modifications for decades to come, and in 1940 it was still in its infancy as a series. Now let us focus on the historical backdrop of 1940. America was still recovering from the Great Depression. Franklin D. Roosevelt was leading the nation with his New Deal policies, while at the same time preparing for the possibility of war in Europe, although the United States would not enter World War II until December 1941. The events unfolding overseas were already influencing the American economy industry, and public sentiment coins struck in 1940, including the Jefferson nickel, reflected a sense of stability, continuity, and readiness for whatever challenges lay ahead. From a technical standpoint, the 1940 Jefferson nickel was struck in a composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. The standard alloy used since the coin's introduction, the weight was 5 grams with a diameter of 21. 2 millimeters and a plain edge production took place at 3 mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, each producing millions of nickels. Yet with subtle variations that intrigue collectors to this day, the Philadelphia mint coins carried no mint mark. The Denver issues bore a small D mint mark on the reverse to the right of Monticello, and the San Francisco coins carried an S mint mark in the same position. Mintage figures for 1940 are significant. Philadelphia produced over 176 million nickels. Denver struck around 43 million, and San Francisco added nearly 40 million together. These numbers ensured that the coin circulated widely across the country, becoming a familiar presence in pockets, purses, and cash registers. However, within these large mintages, there exist varieties and conditions that make certain examples far more valuable and desirable than others to collectors. The strike quality varied depending on the mint, with some coins showing sharper details, particularly in Monticello's steps, while others suffered from weaker impressions, making the full step designations a key factor in grading, and value collectors of Jefferson nickels often focus on the so-called full steps designation, which refers to the clarity of the steps at the base of Monticello on the reverse. A coin that shows 5 or 6 complete steps without breaks or weakness is considered a full steps example. Such coins are scarce for many years of the series, and the 1940 issue is no exception. While millions of nickels were struck, only a fraction display fully defined steps, and those that do are highly sought after by specialists. High-grade, full steps examples can command impressive premiums at auction, especially when certified by reputable grading services. Beyond the technical details, the 1940 Jefferson nickel holds significance as a coin struck at a crossroads in American history. Collectors often view it as part of the pre-war era, when the design was still new and the nation was still at peace. Within just a few years, the composition of the nickel would change dramatically during World War II, when silver was used in place of nickel to conserve the strategic metal for wartime production. The so-called war nickels issued from 1942 to 1945 stand apart, but the 1940 issue remains a reminder of the last years before that dramatic shift in materials. Errors and varieties of the 1940 Jefferson nickel add another layer of fascination. Among them are double dies, repunched mint marks, and striking anomalies. Some examples show noticeable doubling in the inscriptions or details of Monticello. Others display mint marks that were punched more than once, creating overlapping impressions. These varieties may not be common, but they capture the attention of specialists who scour their collections and rolls of nickels, hoping to uncover a hidden rarity. The condition of a 1940 Jefferson nickel plays a crucial role in determining its value circulated. Examples are abundant and usually hold little more than face value unless they exhibit unique characteristics. However, uncirculated coins, especially those with brilliant luster, sharp strikes and full steps designation, can bring hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on rarity and certification. The grading scale developed by the American Numismatic Association provides a framework for assessing these coins from circulated grades, like good and fine, to mint state levels ranging from MS-60 to MS-67 and beyond. Examples at the highest levels of preservation are exceptionally rare and form the pinnacle of many collections. Over the decades, the Jefferson nickel series has sometimes been overlooked compared to other American coins such as the Lincoln cent or the Morgan silver dollar. Yet it has gained increasing respect among numismatists for its longevity, diversity, and historical context. The 1940 issue in particular has a special place because of its timing in history, its role in the development of the series, and its connection to Jefferson's legacy. As we reflect on this coin, we see more than metal. We see craftsmanship, design, symbolism, and history intertwined. The Jefferson nickel of 1940 speaks to the values of America, the admiration of its leaders, the continuity of its coinage, and the enduring connection between people and the money they use. Each example, whether worn from decades of circulation or preserved in mint state condition, carries with it stories of commerce, survival, and national identity. It is a coin that invites us to look closer, to appreciate the artistry of Felix Schlag, to consider the political climate of the time, and to understand the importance of seemingly ordinary objects in telling the extraordinary story of a nation. So when you hold a 1940 Jefferson nickel in your hand, remember you are not just holding 5 cents. You are holding the legacy of Thomas Jefferson, the creativity of Felix Schlag, the industrial might of the United States Mint, and the resilience of a nation on the verge of historic change. This small coin is a portal into the past, and a reminder of how even the simplest things can carry profound meaning. Step back in time with me to the year 1947, when the world was recovering from the aftermath of the Second World War, a time of transition when America was shifting from wartime production to peacetime prosperity, and among the countless symbols of American resilience and stability was a small 5-cent coin. The Jefferson nickel, and the 1947 issue of this coin carries a story far greater than its size. It represents continuity, change, and the enduring legacy of American coinage. The Jefferson nickel series began in 1938 when it replaced the Buffalo nickel, and its design by sculptor Felix Schlag showcased Thomas Jefferson on the obverse with Monticello, his Virginia home, on the reverse. By 1947, the design was already well established in the pockets of everyday Americans, yet each year tells its own unique story, and the 1947 issue is no exception. To understand the 1947 Jefferson nickel, we must first look at the climate of the United States at the time. Factories that once produced tanks, planes, and ammunition were now producing consumer goods, cars, refrigerators, and televisions. The war had left its mark, but Americans were eager to move forward, and coins were part of that movement in daily life. By 1947, the wartime alloy changes of the Jefferson nickel had ended during World War II. From 1942 to 1945, the composition of the nickel had been altered to save nickel metal for the war effort, with silver, manganese, and copper being used instead. But beginning in 1946, the mint returned to the traditional composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. This makes the 1947 nickel part of the first full post-war issues struck entirely in the original metal blend, again, a symbol of returning normalcy and stability. The minting of the 1947 Jefferson nickel took place at 3 locations: the Philadelphia Mint, the Denver Mint, and the San Francisco Mint, each producing millions of coins, yet with slight variations and different mint marks that today carry weight. In the eyes of collectors, the Philadelphia Mint produced the largest share, and like all Philadelphia coins of the time, it bore no mint mark. The Denver Mint coins featured a small D mint mark located on the reverse to the right of Monticello, and The San Francisco Mint struck its share with an S mint mark. Each of these varieties holds its own appeal to numismatists. When examining the design itself, the obverse portrait of Thomas Jefferson in profile still maintained the crisp sculptural lines envisioned by Schlag, although dye wear and striking pressure at times led to weakness in detail, especially in Jefferson's hair and cheekbone areas. The reverse with Monticello often suffered from weakness in the steps of the building, which would later give rise to the famous full steps designation among collectors. A coin with fully struck steps is considered far more desirable and valuable, and 1947 is no exception in that regard. Condition rarity is a central part of the story, with many coins from 1947 surviving in circulated grades, but relatively fewer in pristine mint state condition, free of bag marks, scratches, or dull luster in the realm of coin grading, where experts assess coins on a scale from 1 to 70, the finest. Examples of 1947 nickels command strong interest, especially when they display that coveted full steps detail. Collectors and historians also view the 1947 nickel as part of a transitional period in U.S. coinage. It is not tied to the wartime silver, nickels, nor is it yet part of any design change. It exists in that post-war calm, a coin that quietly circulated through the hands of Americans during the early days of the baby boom, the dawn of the Cold War, and the rise of post-war prosperity. If you were to hold a 1947 nickel, you would be touching a piece of a time when a gallon of gas was just a few cents, when a loaf of bread was inexpensive, and when families were beginning to dream of suburban homes with white picket fences. While the mintages of 1947 nickels were high enough to meet circulation demand, the coin in high grade is where true rarity lies. Philadelphia struck over 100 million coins. Denver and San Francisco each produced tens of millions, yet most of those coins endured years of use pocket wear and banking circulation, which makes uncirculated survivors particularly appealing. Professional grading services such as PCGS and NGC have encapsulated and certified many of these nickels, giving modern collectors a way to assess authenticity and condition reliably. As with many Jefferson nickels, the 1947 issue is also studied for its die varieties, repunched mint marks, doubled dies, and striking anomalies. Specialists in the series often devote entire catalogs to documenting these subtle variations, which add layers of complexity and intrigue to the hobby. For example, repunched mint marks from the Denver and San Francisco issues show the handcraftsmanship of placing mint marks into dies, a process that would later become mechanized, adding charm to the imperfections of the era. It is also worth considering the cultural resonance of Jefferson himself. By 1947, Jefferson represented not just a founding father, but also the embodiment of American ideals, of democracy, expansion, and intellectual curiosity. Placing his portrait on the 5-cent coin ensured his image circulated daily in millions of transactions from grocery stores to movie theaters, reinforcing his legacy for every American citizen. Monticello, on the reverse, further underscored his vision and his deep connection to Virginia heritage. For those building collections today, the 1947 nickel can be approached in several ways. One might seek a simple representative circulated example to tell the story of post-war coinage, or one might aim higher, assembling a full mint mark set in mint state condition with sharp details, or even focus on finding the elusive full steps examples that command premium values at auction records. Reveal that top-graded specimens with full steps can sell for hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on their rarity and eye appeal, far above their humble face value of 5 cents. This long history and numismatic depth is what transforms the 1947 Jefferson nickel from a small everyday coin into a window of the past. It is not just copper and nickel alloy, it is a storyteller of post-war America, a witness to change, and a collector treasure waiting to be discovered.